In Act 4 of Hamlet is taken away to England for much of the act, and it is the act in which he appears the least. And it creates some room for Shakespeare to tell the story of Ophelia. So we're going to talk about the story of Ophelia in this PowerPoint using an article by Elaine Showalter called Representing Ophelia, Women, Madness, and the Responsibilities of Feminist Criticism. So this is going to be an overview of feminist literary theory, and as well as a overview of this article by Elaine Showalter, who is a prominent feminist and a professor of literature at Princeton University. All right, so briefly, what is feminist criticism? You probably have talked about feminism in some way before. Hopefully, you've talked about it in connection with literary theory. Essentially, feminist criticism is concerned with the ways in which literature reinforce or undermine the economic, political, social, and psychological oppression of women. So a feminist literary critic is looking at the inherently patriarchal culture that a text is written in to expose the explicit and implicit misogyny in male writing about women. If you think about books that you've read in high school, and if you try to think about female authors that you've read in high school, maybe you think of Emily Dickinson, Jane Austen, Emily Bronte. Maybe you've read... it's hard. It's hard to think of women writers because the majority of the Western canon is male writers. And so feminist criticism has said, what does it look like to read these works from a gendered perspective? And it's also said, what does it look like to say, why are there no female authors? And so feminist criticism has done much to dig up really good works of literature in the past that women have written and bring them into the light of day in order to give us a greater sense of the literature that people were writing during those time periods. So there are 6 sort of major ideas that all feminists would more or less agree on. Feminism is a broad category, and there's a lot of differences in feminism, but most feminists would agree, starting at the top and working around clockwise, that women are oppressed by patriarchy. Patriarchy is a male-dominated society. In such a society, the woman is other. She's marginalized, defined by her difference from male norms and values. Women in and of themselves are not judged as people. Rather, they're just judged by the difference or the subtraction between them and a man. For the feminist, all of Western civilization is deeply rooted in patriarchal ideology, so it's difficult to go anywhere in the quote-unquote civilized or cultivated or cultured world without finding a patriarchal society. Another root idea for the feminists is that biology determines our sex, while culture determines our gender. Feminism has done a lot for LGBTQ studies and bringing other marginalized groups into the forefront. Feminism early on is very attached to the civil rights movement in America, connected with abolition and other concerns. So feminism has been a progressive movement in American history and world history to improve not just the lives of women, but also of other marginalized groups. So it's not a surprise then that a primary goal of feminism is to promote gender equality, and it does so believing that gender plays a part in every aspect of human production and experience, including the study of English literature. This is just a very brief overview of 3 sort of stages of feminism. So first wave feminism it's hard to find anybody who in public discourse would disagree with the goals of first wave feminism. Mary Wollstonecraft, Susan B. Anthony, early women's rights reformers who were essentially just arguing for suffrage, for the right to vote, and other ways for women to be brought into national conversation. It might surprise you that did not occur in America until 1920. It's not even been 100 years in our country in which women had the right to vote, which seems crazy to consider, but is true. So these early women's activists did a tremendous work in paving the way for what would come in the future in our view of women. So in the second wave of feminism in the early 60s and 70s, tumultuous times, sexual revolution, Woodstock, hippies, all these new ideas flooding into the American political landscape. And you have writers like Elaine Showalter, who we'll be talking about, who are beginning to dovetail feminism with American civil rights and really continue to push just beyond the basic sort of human rights that everybody should have into more day-to-day kinds of misogyny and treatment that women were experiencing. That, of course, has been all the further clarified by third wave feminism in the early 90s to now, though some would maybe argue that we're moving into sort of a fourth phase, in which we're seeing a lot of conversation about women like Alice Walker, who is a woman but also an African American, working to reconcile feminism with the concerns of the black community, the survival and wholeness of her people, men and women both, for the promotion of dialogue and community, as well as for the valorization of women and of all the varieties of work women perform. So again, continuing to hone and to look at these smaller ways, but nonetheless very meaningful ways in which women are still treated as lesser or other in our society. All right, so that is a general overview of what feminism is all about.